Right, so we're almost at the end of January, and you might not have realised this, but Hamas haven't fired a single rocket into Israel at all for the whole of this year, until last night. I hadn't realised this until I picked up on this story this morning. It's not like our media reporting that all the Israeli atrocity committed in Gaza this year has gone without retaliation from Hamas for weeks now, though if you were to ask Israel, they'd tell you it was because they're winning the war. They're taking Hamas out. They're destroying all of their weaponry. And although the resumption of the rocket fire from Gaza into Israel does have the effect of exposing that Israeli narrative as yet another pack of lies coming from them, that isn't the reason they have resumed attacks of their own, because the real reason is so much sadder than that, and it's just so bloody avoidable. Right, so last night rocket attacks from Hamas resumed, targeting Tel Aviv with some 10 or 11 rockets. Different sources quote different numbers, but no fatalities were reported. Why in over a month is this the first time Hamas have fired any rockets? Why did they actually stop when Israel clearly haven't let up on their atrocities at all? Well, it comes back to that South African submission against Israel for the crime of genocide against Gaza. Hamas welcomed the intervention by South Africa, and when the application by South Africa was filed on December 29th of last year, Hamas put its rockets down. For the first time ever, Israel was being held to account, and they were going to let due process take its course. Israel was having its day in the dock at The Hague, would face the International Court of Justice and be forced to face up to its crimes. Throughout January, as they waited for the ICJ to set that date for the hearings and then hear those hearings and then deliberated over the evidence presented before arriving at a provisional judgment in order to intervene and lay down orders to mitigate potential genocide. Hamas left their rockets where they were. And indeed, if the ICJ judgment were being adhered to, being listened to, if the international community, if all those signatories of the Genocide Convention around the world were upholding those provisional orders, as they have a responsibility to, were meeting those responsibilities, Hamas probably still wouldn't have fired a single rocket. But that hasn't been the case, has it? The ICJ laid out its provisional orders, and within 2 days, Israeli government ministers were singing and dancing and giving speeches at a conference where plans were drawn up to ethnically cleanse Gaza and put responsibility for the 2.2 million people this would displace on the rest of the world. Benjamin Netanyahu gave a speech saying all decent, right-thinking people would ignore the judgment of the ICJ. Our leaders here in the UK have dodged commenting on the ICJ ruling, but couldn't fall over themselves fast enough to back up Israel as they accused UNRWA of being a vehicle for Hamas, on the basis that they have, without evidence, accused 12 members of that organisation, 15,000 strong in Gaza, of helping Hamas on October 7th. The USA is just the same. White House spokesperson John Kirby, a man with a perpetual expression of desperately needing the bathroom, continues to deny and make excuses for what is blatantly happening before all of our eyes. Western nations have lined up to defund UNRWA as a result, the only humanitarian body operating within Gaza, operating medical facilities, schools and more, upholding a large part of the infrastructure, and is the reason so many Western nations, ours included, does not need to take Palestinian applications for asylum. All of that is now up in the air. Another more sinister part of the attack on UNRWA itself, notably, given their involvement in Gaza, is that makes them a key source for evidence for the ICJ trial against Israel. So if they collapse or are brought down, the South African case against Israel becomes increasingly more jeopardised. Israel have as good as admitted this in the past, that unless UNRWA is disbanded, the war against Gaza cannot be won. This is a coordinated political attack on the last line of defence for Gaza should all else fail. Despite the legal ruling, despite prima facie being met on the matter of Israeli genocide in Gaza and the case being taken on formally by the ICJ and being taken forwards, despite the risks of being found to be aiding and abetting genocide by so many other nations and their leaders individually, they've still chosen to take Israel's side, as if they are a better judge of the actual situation than the highest court on the planet is. The reality is more along the lines of, for the sake of having a foothold in the Middle East, the lives of Palestinians are a price worth paying. Well, I won't be supporting any leader or any political party that supports that. Both the Tories and Labour can go to hell. Equally, however, we can point to other nations in the Middle East for their inaction too. Where are the other Arab nations? Where are the oil-rich Gulf nations? Sure, the Houthis in Yemen are doing their bit to blockade shipping, but that doesn't help the people of Gaza. That just causes problems for Israel. Iran is an oil-rich Gulf nation, arguably the most powerful nation in the Middle East. They might be funding the Houthis, but how about they fund UNRWA instead? It can only ever be seen as an inherent weakness that this UN aid agency is so heavily reliant on Western pro-Israel nations for its funding. Iran and others, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, whoever, could step in with funding and keep UNRWA going, removing their financial concerns overnight. They're wealthy enough. These are Muslims like you for the most part, are they not? Arabs like you, are they not? Is this not why you're up in arms at Israel's actions? Well, how about putting some aid money where your mouths are? Israel think they can stop UNRWA by undermining their reputation and finances. You guys out there are wealthy enough and powerful enough to screw that idea right up. Compared to those vast oil revenues some of these nations make, to keep UNRWA going would be a drop in the ocean, if you forgive the pun. So in light of legal enforcement failures, aid agency smears and defunding, and the failure of other Arab states to step up to the plate, Hamas's wait and see, let's let due process run its course and see if something changes, have all amounted to nothing changing, not from their perspective. So is it any wonder they've resumed rocket attacks? It's all they've got left, along with reminding Israeli civilians that their government are liars, and if they think they've put the military arm of Hamas down, they really haven't. And the worst part of all of this is that the attacks involving Gazan civilians are only likely to increase now as a result, because Israel will now only redouble their efforts, and Western nations will only redouble their excuses to keep supporting the occupiers and the genocidalists. Following that hospital attack in Jenin in the West Bank being reported on today in some areas, with patients being killed where they lay by the IDF, we're already seeing it. There is no Hamas in the West Bank after all. This is an escalation. So often we hear that slogan, give peace a chance. It looks like Hamas gave it a month and the rest of the world just let them down by not upholding international law, not upholding a court judgment. The nations subject to those provisional orders has ignored them without consequence, and the rest of the Arab world, with the exception of the Houthis in Yemen, have just sat and watched. If international law is not upheld, then there is no international law. Instead, just a dictatorial international rules-based order, which does as it likes, and because the West is so invested in Israel, because Israel is so invested in them, that no matter what they do, they will be supported. It's not a fair fight. The only people following the ICJ ruling are the ones on the receiving end of this genocide. The loss of UNRWA will be the final nail in the coffin for Gaza. And if you want to find out more about how critical this aid agency is to the people of Gaza, and indeed the West Bank too, 6 million people all told rely on them, then you should watch this video next, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next video. Cheers, folks.